fog everywhere. Fog up the river, where it flows among greenates and meadows. Fog down the river, where it rolls defiled among the tiers of shipping and the waterside pollutions of a great and dirty city.
These words weren't written about Delhi or Jakarta or Beijing. No. This is how Charles Dickens described the filthy air in London, back when he wrote the novel Bleak House more than 150 years ago. And he wasn't the only one struggling to breathe. Now, London still looks pretty grey. But it used to be even more polluted than cities across India are today.
There's a couple of weeks in winter where there's like a wall of smoke. And so you see it.
This matters because air pollution is one of the biggest killers in the world.
Every year we have 7 million premature deaths caused by exposure to air pollution. I think this gives you an idea of the terrible public health risk we are confronting here.
Satellite images show particulate concentrations in 2019 were greatest across Asia and Africa. The air in Europe, meanwhile, has gotten much safer. So what can London's past teach Asian cities today? The World Health Organization calls air pollution a silent killer. Every breath we take contains invisible particles and gases that together knock 2 to 3 years off our lives. These harm the lungs and lead to diseases like asthma and lung cancer.
But those particles, the PM, the particulate matter, they are so small, so teeny, that they go everywhere. The smallest ones, they will go into our bloodstream. And then from there, obviously, they can affect any system, any part of our body.
What people don't realize is that includes your heart and even your brain.
Even the IQ. What are we doing? We're putting at risk the IQ of the new generation. You have been exposed to an incredible level of pollution, and that will reduce your capacity to develop, and that is totally unacceptable.
One of the biggest barriers is that many governments consider air pollution a necessary evil, however many people get sick. Air pollution rises when countries industrialize. And cities across Asia have developed like London did back during the Industrial Revolution. When workers burned coal to power engines, they released particles that stained shirts and shocked writers like Dickens.
Smoke lowering down from chimney pots, making a soft black drizzle with flakes of soot in it as big as full-grown snowflakes.
Dickens's descriptions stayed valid for decades to come. The amount of raw sewage at the time was so great that Victorian London experienced the Great Stink. A century later, the pollution caused the Great Smog, which officials at the time estimate killed 4,000 people in a week. Now, this made life as horrible as it sounds. The fog was so dense that it stopped trains, shuttered shops, and even helped thieves prowl in the dark. And that's all before you factor in the cost to health. Londoners died from lung diseases like bronchitis in greater numbers as the air got worse. At the peak of the pollution, the health damage alone is estimated to have cost up to 20% of British GDP. The bad news is that Delhi's air today is pretty much as bad as London's was a century ago. And like in London, that costs lives.
We're smoking about 7 cigarettes a day on average in Delhi, in North India. And in the winter, it goes up to, about 20 cigarettes. Now, the thing that is really awful about that is that a newborn child is smoking that many cigarettes a day. My children smoked 2,500 cigarettes last year, and that is shattering.
Knowing the scale of the damage puts parents in an impossible bind.
Mothers in India are very famous for being very protective of our children, and you just feel so completely helpless that, my goodness, this is happening to my children and I can't do anything about it.
Delhi's air gets extra bad in winter because farmers in surrounding states burn crops, and the cold air traps the smoke that blows over. But much of urban India's pollution has come from burning more coal and driving more cars.
When I grew up in Mumbai in the 80s and 90s, having a car was an incredibly a luxury item. Very few families had a car. And in the last 20 years, with liberalization and globalization taking place in India, cars have become very commonplace. And so everybody has a car, and these are not held to the same standards as cars in the US and Europe.
Scientists say air quality first gets worse as countries industrialize and use more energy, but then after a while, the costs become too high to ignore, and they invest in solving the problem. That's how Britain fixed it over the course of a century. The government moved factories out of cities, brought in a Clean Air Act to find companies belching out poisons, and replaced coal cookers with gas. It built parks and public transport networks that reduced reliance on cars. And in doing so, they showed critics of environmental regulations that saving lives also means saving money.
This argument about the fact that if you want to develop economically, you need to destroy the environment, and by destroying the environment, destroying my lungs, is not correct.
But Europe still hasn't fully solved it. Outdoor air pollution today still causes 400,000 early deaths in Europe each year. People in the poorest parts of cities often live close to factories and roads thick with pollutants. And because Europe has exported a lot of its manufacturing to factories in Asia, it's exported some of its air pollution too. So, what can urban India take away from this? Authorities are tightening fuel standards and, in some cities, closing power stations and restricting when you can drive cars. India is also looking next door to the progress made in China. After President Xi Jinping declared war on pollution, Beijing reduced its levels of fine particles by 35% in just 5 years from 2013. The UN called it an enormous investment of time, resources, and political will. But in cities across India, the air is clearing too slowly to celebrate. And until the government tackles the sources of pollution, residents are forced to live their lives around it. That's why Dariush Rathod makes HEPA filters, to block toxic particles coming in from outside. These air purifiers start off white.
Like say, this is like in 1 week. This is something it looks like within a month. Then if you use further, this is what you get. This is the pollution what you breathe in Delhi. This filter has been used for more than 3 months.
Without solving the causes of air pollution, filters like these just reduce the effects of the problem.
I am lucky enough and privileged enough that I have air purifiers in every room in my house. We try to manage it very carefully. First, we protect our children as much as we can afford to, and then we go out to fight, because that's just a mother's instinct.
But with so many successful examples to learn from, Indian cities now need to scale solutions up to bring their pollution down. And if they're really stuck for ideas, well, they could do worse than going out and planting a tree. If you liked what you saw, then hit subscribe. We've got new videos coming out every Friday about these environmental crises shaping our lives.